Hello everyone and good evening. I'm Don Arleth and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. Donald Trump has hinted at a possible change in the U.S. approach to supplying offensive weapons to Ukraine. This comes as Russia launched a barrage of nearly 600 drones and 40 missiles against Ukrainian cities overnight. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at some of the other headlines. Poland issues protest letter to Russia over a drone that exploded after entering Polish airspace. Suspect in 2022 Nord Stream blast detained in Italy. Serbian journalists protest violence targeting media amid unrest. We start off tonight with a surprising assessment from an unlikely figure on why the Western strategy for Ukraine to win the war based only on defense was doomed from the very beginning. It is very hard, if not impossible, without attacking an invader's country, U.S. President Donald Trump wrote in one of his latest posts on social media. Now let's go to Oz Chatterjee in Kyiv for the latest. Good evening, Oz. So what's the reaction in Ukraine to this latest post by Donald Trump?
Well, this tweet will certainly, or Truth Social post rather, which will certainly be greeted warmly here in Kyiv. If I can cast your minds back to the end of the Biden administration, there was this long-running push from Kyiv towards Washington to convince the Biden administration to allow Ukraine to target Russian forces deeper inside Russian lines using Western-provided munitions. It's important to note that Ukraine has been targeting inside Russia for a couple of years now, more than that, using their own domestically supplied ammunition and weapons. It's also reported today that Ukraine is getting cruise missiles, its own domestically produced cruise missiles on board soon. So these are things that Ukrainians will be certainly pleased to hear from Donald Trump. Let's take a quick look at what he actually said.
It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense, but is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning. It is like that with Ukraine and Russia.
Now, Ukrainian has been here before with Donald Trump's statements posted on social media, so they will wait for official policy announcements rather than tweets to take their general cue on changes in U.S. policy.
Absolutely, Oz. Now, in another development, a Ukrainian national who's wanted in Germany for blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines was arrested in Italy. Is there any reaction from Kyiv?
No acknowledgement of that at all so far tonight, and it's also unlikely to come. The Ukrainians, President Zelenskyy, officially denied any involvement in this attack in March 2023, and that remains the line from Kyiv. So they aren't probably going to acknowledge this for the time being. If we do hear something, it will likely be from President Zelenskyy himself. We do understand from reporting in Germany, from Der Spiegel, the German news magazine, that they suspect that Ukrainian special forces were involved in the attack. Now, the German Federal Prosecutor's Office has already issued a previous arrest warrant for someone called Volodymyr Z, and Serhiy K is the name of the person that has been arrested in Italy, in the Rimini region, under a European arrest warrant by Italian police. Now, it's unclear when or how the process of being extradited from Italy to Germany will begin for this individual who is a Ukrainian national, but definitely no response from Kyiv on that so far tonight.
All right, Oz Chatterjee reporting there from Kyiv. Thanks for your report, and do keep yourself safe. One person was killed and more than 20 were wounded in Russia's latest air attack against Ukrainian cities. A U.S.-owned electronics plant in western Ukraine's Zakarpattia region was hit in what was one of the only attacks against Ukraine's southwestern borders. Our correspondent Alex Cardier accompanied a Ukrainian air defense patrol in the Black Sea and has more on the story.
Well, despite high-level diplomatic talks, despite the summit in Alaska, despite the meeting in Washington, D.C., despite Russia's claims that it wants to engage in the peace process, the evidence overnight in Ukraine has been very different indeed. We've seen cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and hundreds of drones launched over this country. Explosions reported in Kyiv, in Lviv, all the way in western Ukraine, next to the border with Poland, of course. This very boat here in the Black Sea was part of that air defense effort, using these guns to shoot Shahed drones out of the sky. More than 540 shot down across Ukraine of the more than 610 missiles and drones alike launched at this country overnight. It is the kind of large-scale air attack that so many Ukrainians have gotten used to, rushing into shelters if they are lucky to have them, sleep-deprived and forced to live under the threat of this Russian attack. So clearly, on the public face, Russia says it wants to engage in peace. Right here in Ukraine, it is continuing this war, continuing these attacks on civilian infrastructure, on cities, on energy infrastructure. But clearly, the Ukrainians doing what they can with this boat and the range of air defense measures they have to try and keep their skies clean. On the Black Sea, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
Russian sabotage operations against the West surged at an alarming rate, quadrupling between 2022 and 2024, and then continue to be on the rise this year. Russian drones are still breaching NATO airspace, with the latest incident occurring in Poland. The question now is, how far is Moscow willing to go before the West strikes back? Our defense correspondent Zuzana Jurek has the details in this report.
The night of August 20th, when a suspected Shahed-type drone exploded over the Polish territory, igniting the sky in the eastern town of Oshina. In the immediate investigation that followed, the Polish prosecutor's office revealed that the Russian drone most likely entered the country's airspace around midnight after it crossed the Polish-Belarusian border. Although the cause of the explosion is still being investigated, experts are speculating on two likely scenarios.
This drone could fall into our airspace as a result of disruption of its navigation system by the means of Ukrainian electronic warfare. But also, it could have been sent intentionally by Russia.
The Polish defense minister was quick to point out that this is neither an isolated case nor an accident.
Drones have ended up in Romania, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia and Bulgaria, and now for the first time in Poland. We are talking about at least a dozen drones here. They were all intended to end up in Ukraine. This is how Russian provocations work.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki pledged that the security services would remain on high alert.
I assure you that the head of the National Security Bureau is in constant contact with the Minister of National Defense. The National Security Bureau is monitoring the entire matter, and we will continue to do so in the President's office in the coming days and weeks.
In response to the incident, Poland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs gave a letter of protest to the Russian embassy, in which
Poland demands that Russia explain this incident and cease such provocative actions. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, such incidents undermine the credibility of the Russian Federation as a participant in any peace process or activities of the international community.
With security officials also highlighting that the perceived provocation is most likely tied to diplomatic peace efforts to end the war in Ukraine.
In modern hybrid warfare, it is typical to use such direct military action to achieve political goals, especially now when the peace process run by the Trump administration and coalition are willing.
This latest incident comes at a time when international observers are calling out Russia for its record number of sabotage attempts against NATO countries, and Poland isn't the only eastern flank member where drones are an issue. On Thursday, Lithuania announced that it has established a no-fly zone near its border with Belarus until October 1st, in response to drones entering from there, most recently on July 28. NATO's eastern flank has moved to combat airspace violations, floating Baltic Drone War Initiative in February. The idea is to implement multi-layer counter-drone defenses, mobile and fixed anti-drone platforms to fortify the land and aerial borders of the eastern flank. The concept is still in its infancy. For TVP World, Zuzana Jurek.
Now let's go to NATO's longest land border with Russia, as hybrid attacks originating from the Kremlin have exploded since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Finland, one of the newest members of the alliance, is not taking the threat posed by its neighbor lightly. Here's a report by our chief political correspondent, Aaron Dahmen.
I'm standing on Finnish territory, and just through this fence behind me is Russia. When officials refer to the eastern flank, when they refer to a potential attack from the Kremlin, this is what they are talking about. Finland joined NATO more than 2 years ago. It has the longest line of contact with Russia of any NATO member country, 1,300 kilometres. President Alexander Stubb said as much when European leaders met at the White House for Ukraine talks this week.
Some of the international media might wonder, why is the President of Finland here? I think the reason is probably that we might come from a small country, but we have a long border with Russia, over 800 miles. And we, of course, have our own historical experience with Russia from World War II, the Winter War and the War of Continuation.
The border between Finland and Russia is now closed, with authorities saying Moscow was using migrants to wage a hybrid war. That's part of the reason for this fence, not to defend a military operation, but to stop illegal crossings. By the end of next year, it will cover 200 kilometres of the border, targeting high-risk areas. But it also sends a message. This is about European security in practice, and about the continent responding to the Kremlin's threats. For TVP World, from the Finnish-Russian border, I'm Aaron Dahmen.
As Serbia enters its 10th month of relentless anti-government protests, a darker force has emerged, one not from the crowds, but from the state itself. Reports of police brutality are mounting, with shocking allegations of beatings and threats against student activists and journalists alike. Pavel Trzaskowski highlights his growing threats to anti-corruption protesters in Serbia.
Amid the anti-government protests that have been ongoing in Serbia for 10 months, a new kind of opposition can now be heard on the streets. These people are opposing the student-led blockades, claiming they paralyze the lives of everyday people.
The gathering is sending the message that people are fed up with blockades that prevent them from going to work and their children from going to school.
These demonstrations, organized across Serbia, align with the country's president, Aleksandar Vučić, who has recently escalated his crackdown on student protesters. And this crackdown produced yet another group of demonstrators, those who oppose police brutality. These people gathered in Belgrade this week after student protester Nikolina Sindelic reported she was beaten and threatened with rape by the police.
They kept us for several hours, during which everyone experienced psychological abuse. Unfortunately, one man and I got hit the hardest, as the commander of that unit brutally beat both him and me. He called us offensive names, told me I was a whore and that he would rape me there in front of everyone, that I would regret trying to overthrow the state.
But protesters are not the only targets of police brutality. The European Federation of Journalists has issued a statement calling on the Serbian authorities to curb what it says is the systematic persecution of journalists, which creates an environment in which physical attacks, death threats and harassment are not only tolerated but encouraged.
It's clear that the Serbian authorities are actively involved in the brutal repression of journalists who are just trying to do their job. With our affiliates in Serbia, we document all these cases of violence. The perpetrators have been identified. They will be held to account.
The increased police brutality comes as Vučić's government is clearly under pressure after 10 months of unabating protests.
The fact that violence is now being used, I think, shows the level of desperation of the government.
On Sunday, Vučić announced that the state will take more decisive action against the protesters within 3 to 4 days.
At one point, you will see the full determination of the state of Serbia.
And this vague deadline passes on Thursday. Pavel Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan met in Yerevan for high-level talks focused on peace, regional stability, and strengthening bilateral ties. The visit comes at a sensitive time as Iran remains concerned about the U.S. brokered negotiations on a transit corridor involving Armenia and Azerbaijan. Diana Skaya reports on what is at stake for the Islamic Republic.
A quick diplomatic move. Just days after Armenia signed a U.S.-brokered peace deal with Azerbaijan, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian landed in Yerevan, determined to maintain Tehran's influence in the South Caucasus. The new U.S.-brokered pact deal was meant to end decades of conflict, but also gives Washington exclusive rights to develop a new transit route, the so-called Trump route for international peace and prosperity. For the U.S. and Azerbaijan, it's a new gateway to Europe. For Iran, it's a threat. Tehran fears the corridor could sideline its own trade routes, weaken its crucial link with Armenia, and bring American influence closer to its border.
Peace is impossible without closing the Karabakh issue. The Karabakh issue was indeed simply used by some forces as a tool to prevent Armenia's independence, sovereignty, the establishment and development of statehood.
Pashinyan sought to reassure Tehran, stressing Armenia's control over the corridor while unveiling new bilateral projects.
One of these projects of strategic importance is the 32-kilometer Karajan-Agarik road section, the construction of which the Armenian side has entrusted to an Iranian company.
Tehran, meanwhile, is pushing its own vision, linking Iran, Armenia, Russia, and India through the north-south transport corridor, and to keep trade under regional hands.
Iran and Armenia have common interests in activating the Persian Gulf Black Sea corridor. The development of the transit railway, land and sea routes will contribute to the development of trade between the two countries, the creation of common free economic zones. The most important ongoing project in the energy sector is the third Armenia-Iran power transmission line. Armenia will be able to export more electricity to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
For Iran, the warning is clear. It won't tolerate being cut out of Caucasus trade. And for Armenia, balancing U.S. peace plans with strategic ties to Tehran may prove to be its toughest road ahead. For TVP World, I'm Diana Skaya.
Poland has an appetite for clean, reliable energy to power the future and has therefore looked to nuclear as means to accomplish this goal. The project for Poland's first nuclear power plant to be built on the Baltic coast is well underway, but the prospect of building a second plant in central Poland just hit a slight roadblock. Jan Kennedy explains in this report.
The construction of Poland's first nuclear power plant on the Baltic Sea coast is still at an early stage, but the Polish government is already planning a second facility somewhere in central Poland and is on the lookout for a partner. One potential contender, South Korea's nuclear giant KHNP, appears to be out of the race.
After the new Polish government took office, the country decided to abandon projects involving state-owned enterprises, and therefore we withdrew our operations there.
KHNP's decision to pull out of Poland is linked to its dispute with the American company Westinghouse over reactor designs.
Americans assume that the Korean technology is not Koreanized, it is coming from US, and the Department of Energy has special rights to agree on any technology transfer, including possible transfer to Polish soil.
As a result, the companies settled out of court. Korean media report that KHNP and its owner KEPCO were forced to buy $650 million worth of goods and services from Westinghouse for every reactor exported outside of South Korea, on top of a $175 million licensing fee. These requirements made exporting reactors much less profitable, and that's why, since the beginning of 2025, KHNP has exited not only Poland, but also Sweden, Slovenia and the Netherlands. The only exception, the Czech Republic's Dukovany plant, where KHNP signed an €18.7 billion deal to build 2 nuclear reactors. Well, the current government had no role in selecting the contractor for the first Polish nuclear power plant. The partner for the second project is expected to be determined through a tender.
The less choice, the worst. The less choice, the less offers you get, and it could impact the negotiations with Americans. But on the other side, it could be already decided that Americans will take the second location, because originally there was this concept in Polish energy strategy to take the technology from one supplier to get the effect of scale.
With the Koreans out of the picture, US company Westinghouse, French energy giant EDF, and Canada's Atkins Reali are left to compete. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
While our eyes continue to focus on Ukraine and when this war could end, I'd like to welcome now to the program Garvin Wall, CEO at Article 7 Intelligence for Democrats. Hello, and thank you so much. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Always good to join you.
Yes. Now, an American company in Zakarpattia was attacked overnight by Russia, causing extensive damage, killing 1 and wounding at least 20. Should there be a reaction from the United States, and what should that be?
Look, the United States needs to understand that Russia is an adversary. Trump seemed to say something like that today. His daily, random statement was complaining about countries not being able to retaliate properly against countries that attack them. So maybe some of that message is sinking in.
Right. Actually, we have that. Can we put that up real quick, just for our viewers?
It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense, but is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning. It is like that with Ukraine and Russia.
All right, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you think that that's the only response that we're going to get is a post from Trump on Truth Social?
Look, I think probably he seems to change his mind depending on what gets him the most attention at any moment in time. This is not an American administration that has serious policy goals in relation to Ukraine. It's really about the Trump show and making sure the Trump show stays on the road. And that's something that European leaders, I think, understood when they created a new episode of the Trump show to move things on from what, from a Ukrainian and European perspective, was a pretty disastrous summit in Anchorage in Alaska.
Right, but from one side, I mean, he does have a point. Many people have been arguing this for years, including myself, that there was no strategy under the Biden administration. They were too afraid to that Russia would be defeated. So, I mean, Ukraine's been playing this game a long time, be on the defensive, but they've been forbidden from being really on the offensive. So could this potentially signal a change in strategy from the West or from the Trump administration?
Well, I think what's more important for Ukraine is the fact that it's been developing its own weapons. We saw also last week, the launch of Ukraine's new cruise missile. It's 3,000 kilometer range, 1,000 kilometer payload. It's heavier than the Tomahawk missile that the Americans have. It's longer range than anything the Europeans have. And if they can produce it in large quantities, that's the kind of thing that will make a difference on the battlefield. We're seeing that Ukraine has been interdicting Russian supplies. It's been harming its energy industry. There are petrol shortages in Russia. There are refined oil shortages in Russia, not only for domestic consumers, but also for foreign export. That affects its economy. This is where this battle is now going to be waged. It's going to be to see whether we can actually cause enough damage to the Russian economy and to the Russian energy infrastructure to force them to change policy. At the moment, the actual front line of the battlefield isn't really the front line. The front line is actually the logistics, the supply, and the ability of Russia to get its troops in the field, and the ability of Russia to earn enough money on the foreign markets to continue to supply them.
Certainly, but on the other hand, Russia is making some advances on the battlefield. We see Ukrainian defenders pretty worn out and tired in the east. I'm not saying that they can't continue to defend their country, because they certainly can. But we are starting to see that it seems like Vladimir Putin is playing for more time. We have this potential upcoming meeting, bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy. And so what's your read on this? Do you think that Putin is going to push for more time to make more gains on the ground?
I think he is, because although the strategy is working slowly, he sees it as working and he doesn't see any alternative. On the other hand, it's so slow that, as the British Ministry of Defense said, it's going to take Russians 4 years to take Luhansk and Donetsk provinces at the current rate. They haven't been able to advance. They're not able to move at scale. They have done some interesting things with drones, but they're not able to mass the forces for the kind of swift attack that you would expect in modern warfare. They're sending their troops in with new types of tactics, but continuously inferior equipment. And the more that Russia can be forced to limit its supply and forced to have its economy stretched further, the harder Russia is going to find this. Only when it becomes more difficult for Russia to continue this creeping advance are we going to see a change in incentive for Russia to actually offer something at the negotiating table. He didn't negotiate seriously in Alaska. He's not going to negotiate seriously if he meets Zelenskyy. He's like a robber who said that, I've taken $100 from you, and now if you give me 50 back, I'll give you 50 back. That's not any kind of reasonable deal that a Ukrainian president, any Ukrainian president, can accept.
Now, back to Zakarpattia, why do you think this was? Do you think this was a big middle finger to Donald Trump? And, it just so happens that you have the largest Hungarian minority in that part of the country. So it seems odd why actually Putin would strike it there.
Yeah, I don't think we should add too much logic to the specific selection of targets that the Russians have. They send a lot of missiles in, a lot of them get intercepted. It's really a matter of luck to see which ones actually get through. In this case, these ones did get through, but it's they have their list of targets. They fire hundreds of missiles at them. Most of them get intercepted. It's not quite that they have a decision to target this particular factory this particular day. They'll have banks of targets. They'll see what gets through. It's not the kind of high precision signaling that you're suggesting. Russia doesn't have that capability. Ukraine's air defenses are too strong for that.
Yes. Now, moving on, another fascinating story today was the arrest of Serhiy K. in Italy, who is going to be extradited for blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines to Germany. On this story, is it more? Do we know that Ukraine and Ukraine intelligence is responsible for this? Many people are also thinking that the United States and potentially its intelligence services may have been responsible.
It's always hard to tell with intelligence services operations. People can be working for several people. We can do a lot of speculation. The important thing is the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed, is not operational, and that's got to be a good thing for the Ukrainian war effort. It's got to be a bad thing for Russia's attempts to bypass Central and Eastern Europe in its gas supplies. And overall, I think it's a good thing that pipeline isn't working.
I agree with you. How do you think Germany is going to pursue this case? Because some inconvenient details may come out.
There are many inconvenient details about Germany's relationship with the Nord Stream program. I hope they do come out, and I hope we can finally have a proper accounting for the decades of corruption and capture of German energy policy by the Russian state that has occurred. Germany really needs to face up to this episode. And if these things do come out in the trial, I think that will help us all understand what serious mistakes Germany made in its energy policy and its geopolitics, and how these mistakes were mistakes that were also moral mistakes. They were serious corruption was involved, and it might be too much to hope that the people responsible will be brought to justice, but at least some of this can finally come out in public.
Yes, and another recent development here in Poland is this Russian drone that flew into the country. It blew up. It caused minor damage to some buildings and no injuries or anything like that. But we see this vast uptick in hybrid attacks and these drones that are coming into NATO airspace. How should we respond to this continuing Russian threat? And I'll ask you to be brief because we're almost out of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to respond a bit cleverly and asymmetrically. So we could put in orders for the new Ukrainian cruise missile. We could station them in other places around Europe. We could continue to support the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia is trying to keep us off balance a bit. Again, they're sending lots of drones. They'll see which ones get through. They're not always tremendously accurate. Their hybrid pressure has been going on for at least the last 20 years. We have to continue being vigilant. But we have to learn that the best response to Russian tactics isn't always to do exactly what they're doing to us, but to do something different that hurts them where they have their weak points. And their weak points right now are economic.
Definitely. All right, Gavin Walsh, CEO at Article 7 Intelligence for Democrats. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.